Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Mending Threads. This is your safe place in your stronghold for whole body wellness, mind, body, and spirit. And today we have a topic that we want to look at. And we received quite a few questions during our last workshop at Trinity United Methodist Church here in Houston, who wanted us to now begin to talk about specific moments and key people so that they could learn more. And I'm going to let you know that you can go to Culture Vision TV, download the app, and you'll be able to see whatever we discuss on Bending Threads at 7 p.m. On Tuesdays. So I'm going to bring on our speaker today and our co-host, Doc. I call him Doc Walker, Aswald Walker, and I'm going to welcome him this morning because he is not only good morning, good morning.
Hey, hey.
So he is the wealth of information in the community. He's an activist in Houston, Texas, and not only Houston, but I'm going to say in other areas of the United States and world. And he has made interventions through his writing. He's an author, and he does workshops, and he's also co-pastor of a church here in Houston, the Shrine. So many of you might visit and know that. He is an activist in bringing churches together so that they can engage in the healing process through the community. So I want to welcome him this morning to see who we could speak about in our introduction to learning about key people and defining moments.
So if you're leaving that to me, one of the people that I would love to talk about is Steve Biko. Steve
Okay.
Biko.
Spell that for some, spell that and
No,
everything.
no
Mm-hmm.
problem. Last name Biko.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Biko was an activist in South Africa. The same time, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and others were, organizing and fighting against apartheid. Just FYI, um, the folk who set up the racist apartheid regime in South Africa used the United States as their model. They used United States segregation as their model for the racist system that they created. But Steve Biko, um, I don't think gets enough credit, enough play, enough attention. Everyone knows the name Nelson Mandela, and rightfully so,
Right.
um, because he put his life on the line trying to bring empowerment and equality to Black people in South Africa. He paid an incredible price that none of us would
Yes.
want to pay. 27
Mm-hmm.
years
Years.
imprisoned in Robbins Island, and I
Mm-hmm.
think he was only allowed like one visitor per year, and I think that was just for like 30 minutes to an hour. I mean, some insane number. Yet he emerged from that, and he still had his humanity intact. And so
Mm-hmm.
Nelson Mandela has an incredible story, and we should all know him. But just as incredible is the story of Steve Biko. And
Mm-hmm.
so the way I introduce Biko to my classes is okay. During apartheid South Africa, you had two people. Well, you had more than two, but these two specifically, um, Mandela and Steve Biko, fighting against racist apartheid South Africa using two different approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Nelson Mandela, his approach was more the, let's just say the Dr. King approach of pointing out the mistreatment, pointing out the inequality that we
Mm-hmm.
need to address. Look at how white people are mistreating us, uh,
Yes.
and because of that, white folk in South Africa, the Boers, had problems with Nelson Mandela. Steve Biko took a whole different approach. For lack of a better term, you could call it the Malcolm X approach.
Yes.
Um, Steve Biko said we need to be focused more on how we see ourselves and how we treat ourselves. Because
Mm-hmm.
if we can respect and love ourselves, then basically there's no power or principality in the world that can stop us from creating the kind of world that we need to. So Nelson Mandela focused on the problem outside of us. Biko focused on the issues and problems and challenges inside of us. What
Mm-hmm.
makes us hate ourselves so we don't trust each other, so we don't work with each other. And then I asked my students the question,
Yes, yes.
which one do you think um, the apartheid regime viewed as the most dangerous? And they give me their answers, and I have my own answer because I say, well, Nelson Mandela, he was jailed for 27 years, so surely they saw him as dangerous. But Steve Biko, they killed him
They
on
killed him.
September
Mm-hmm.
12th, 1977.
Mm-hmm.
They killed him. They didn't want him alive anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
contend they saw that approach as just way more dangerous,
Yes.
waking people up to their worth, to
Mm-hmm.
loving themselves and respecting each other. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I was thinking that I was going to say a question. I think it takes both.
Oh, definitely.
I think that it takes, I think before we even think of harmony, before we think of anything else, the person has to know themselves within. Someone says, if you do not, I'm trying to think of who exactly said that, but I do know that, mm, what's the name of To Kill a Mockingbird? Um,
Maya Angelou?
Maya Angelou said, she was talking and she says, if a person does not know the anger inside of themselves, they cannot express it to someone
Mm,
else. First, you must know the source of your frustration and your anger before you can even talk about relationships or bridging anything with anyone else, because it's
hmm.
not going to be yours when it gets there,
Yeah.
something like that, you see.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's, yeah, she was just so, so I think that my listening to you talk, it's awesome as to how when a person begins to think that we must eradicate or get rid of that, all of the people, many of the people who really tried to do something or say, but they had no idea. And maybe we could talk about that a little. They had no idea that actually was the other way around, in terms of bringing, quietening the storm, so
Right.
to speak, from their point of view. Because
Right.
if they nurtured the thing within, then they would, from a different point of view, satisfaction when you're eating. When you eat something you really want and it's healthy for you too, it satiates the brain.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, you have less problems with the digestive system. But if you
Yeah.
eat something only because it tastes good and it doesn't take to the body, or it doesn't taste good, then you haven't done anything, because it's going to wake itself again real soon.
Yeah. And Biko, Steve Biko was all about allowing us to move to the place where we accept our own authority,
Yes,
where we
yes.
accept our
Mm-hmm.
own definitions of beauty, where we recognize that God gave us agency and intelligence and ideas and abilities. There's a book about him, and it's entitled, one of his sayings was, "I write what I like." You're not going to tell me what to write. You're not going to tell me what to think. I write what I like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a term that he used to describe his work. He called it conscientization, conscientizing, or another way of saying that is waking people up to their worth, getting
Uh-huh.
people to become conscious. Right? He wanted us to see our worth and to claim it in its fullness. He wasn't he knew that he and his sisters and brothers lived in a racist apartheid system, but his
Mm-hmm.
main focus was on us, on healing
Yes,
us, on healing
yes,
us. And I
yes.
agree with you that we need both. But
Mm-hmm.
like you said, and like others have said, one of the foundational spiritual principles is man, woman, know thyself.
Mm-hmm.
That's your first
Mm-hmm.
assignment as a human being. And that's what
Mhm.
Steve Biko was about.
Mhm. So I have people also wanting to know biblical scriptures. So for here's and I'm really trying to. I got to get my techno. I hope somebody's listening. I need a real good technical person with computers and stuff like that. So here's the thing: they want me to flash up on the screen something.
Hmm.
Okay, now listen. A few questions have come in. When pastors are in leadership, how can the pastor know this information? Because we have one of the remedies coming up. But how can this pastors know this information, and how can it be intertwined with what is delivered when most people are listening on Sunday mornings or Wednesday evenings?
That I'll give you two answers. One is easy, and one is hard. The easy answer is, there are all sorts of avenues to getting this information. You are leading one of them with the programs you offer to ministers and to other um, community leaders to learn about how our culture and our history intertwines with
Everything.
everything. And so the easy part is just to sign up and participate.
Mm-hmm.
The more difficult thing is breaking through our slavish devotion to tradition or to the black church is, I mean, I'm a part of the black church. I love the black church, but the black church has issues too, and one of those issues is, and this is of course generally speaking, the black church has not been open to incorporating new information into its faith walk. And so if it's not in the Bible, there's some churches and congregations that don't even want to hear about it. What that then does is it turns off a whole lot of young people who are going to school and they learn about African history and they learn this and that and the other. And they're like, if this is history and this is part of our story, why can't we incorporate it? And there are some churches that don't want to because it doesn't fit the traditional narrative of what the
Mm-hmm.
Christian church is supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
preaching or teaching. One of the things that I harp on is I think geography has to be foundational to any church congregation, to any, you know, how is somebody 100, 200, 500 years from now going to be able to fully understand and appreciate the life of Dr. Willie Mae Lewis if they don't know where you're from, where
Mm-hmm.
you grew up,
Mm-hmm.
the conditions, the
Mm-hmm.
people that surrounded you, all those things help to shape who you are, the
Mm-hmm.
dynamic, incredible person that you are. But if you say where she was born doesn't matter. The fact that she spent a whole lot of time in her grandparents' home being raised, that doesn't matter. That she lived out in the country and she appreciated that life. Those things really had an impact on your worldview, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if we ignore those, we can't get a full picture of who you are. Well, the same is true for Jesus and all those Hebrews in the Bible that we read scriptures about and that we preach about. We totally ignore their geography. We totally
Yes.
ignore their culture. We totally ignore what were the big issues that they were facing on a daily basis. All those things shaped who they were. Um, and I know I'm just rambling, but I mean,
No,
just
but I'm agreeing with you. I at one time I was for years I was Sunday school superintendent, and I
mhm.
really fought to. I really wanted. I did. I went and bought one, but it wasn't what I needed. But I really wanted a wall to wall map
Yes,
in the
yes.
church school, and I begged. I couldn't. The relevance wasn't seen, but I wanted a wall to wall map, and I wanted to pin the change of the countries. where
Mm-hmm.
you change the name of the country and we learn when the countries change and why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, and then look at that in the Bible. And so,
Mm-hmm.
when we were talking about that, we had, I don't know how many young people, but
Mm-hmm.
when we moved from that and just start teaching lessons traditionally from a certain book, we start losing all our young people because just of what you just said.
And
Mhm.
what you just said, like if you had a map in your room when you're teaching Bible study,
Yes.
when you're teaching vacation Bible school or whatever, and you're talking about the Christian story, and you show where that story was founded, a child will look at that and say, wait a minute, that's Africa. Are you telling me that Christianity was
Hmm.
founded in Africa?
Africa.
If
Hmm.
that's the case, well, does that mean that Jesus was black? I mean, those are questions that would come to the mind of anyone simply by just having a map in the room and
Hmm.
incorporating geography into the conversation. What we know as Africa, and we can get deeper. I mean, because what we know as Africa today, we can see the visualization of the continent. In ancient times, Africa was much more than that. It was that, but it also stretched all the way east into India, and
Yes.
it included parts of southern Europe. In the ancient
Right.
world, all that was considered Ethiopia, land of the blacks. And so when you're talking
Yes.
about when did the Bible story take place, where did it take place, when it took place, hell, by the time the first Europeans entered into Africa in any conquering form, 2/3 of the Bible story narrative had already been lived and written about.
Hmm.
And there was no white folk in there.
Right.
But I mean, so that's what I'm talking about. The one thing, it's easy, just sign up for a class and you can learn so much. The other one is more difficult because you're trying to break through generations and generations of tradition of saying we don't need anything that's not in the King James version.
Right.
Even if you looked in the King James version, there are all kinds of things that are there, but you got to have
Yes.
eyes to see.
You got to have eyes, and you have to have somebody to point to it that's well informed, so you'll know what to derive, what lessons. So bringing things together so you can integrate the information for a lesson
Yeah,
and not just be pushed information. You
yeah,
see, so and that's what I call learning. You see, that's a form of learning there when you can
yeah.
integrate that and see the connection between it. So it's so good. So back to our person. So I wanted to ask a question. So before he was killed,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about his platform, um, some dynamics of how his resistance or anything about that, so we can begin to understand what other things he was trying to say that didn't really get said loudly, loudly
Yeah.
said. Mhm.
Well, Steve Biko was 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 not only an activist. I mean, he was a student. Um, he was a grassroots activist, um, and he was part of several organizations. Um, he was at the University of Natal Medical School.
Mhm.
So you're talking about someone who's really got it up here. He's studying to be a doctor. Um, but he said, okay, well, I've got to. That's important, but if black people aren't free, then what is it? So he had to wrestle with all those things. How do I wrestle with my studies and the movement? So he's trying to figure this out. He was
Mhm.
married, so he had that about him, but his main thing
Mhm.
was, how can we get our people conscientized? How can we
Mhm.
wake our people up to our own
Mhm.
worth? It just messed with him to no end that his people were falling for the lie that they were less than, that they were
Right.
inferior. And so
Yes.
he was on a mission to show that that was not true, that that was not the case. So that's who he was. Really intelligent, really dynamic young brother, organizer. So that's what he's doing, and he's also trying to figure out, um, which way forward. Is this is do we take nonviolence or violence? So he had to wrestle with all these things. Nelson Mandela, he was a part of the African National Congress, and after years and decades of pleading and begging to be treated equally, the ANC took up armed resistance, and it wasn't until they did that that the white South Africans began to even their listen to their pleas.
Now, why did they listen to them? Why did they listen to the plea?
Because apparently, historically, um, oppressors, the only language they hear is violence, and that's a horrible, sad fact.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
Violence, or at least the I don't want to say the threat of violence. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say I'm trying to say
A fear of loss of something.
like you have to at least have enough power to let folk know that if they mistreat you, there's going to be consequences and repercussions for their actions. If
Right,
you don't have that power and that ability, they will just continue to mistreat you.
right. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they will, say, oh, we'll give you a little something to, kind of calm you
Right,
down, but
right,
they will
right,
never fully respect you. They'll
right.
never offer you the freedom and equality that you're seeking. But if there's consequences and repercussions, oh, that's when folk actually start listening.
So I wonder, that is so true. I hate that. I really, that just hurts that it's so true. But the thing about it is that they're speaking of love. But I'm thinking when persons in power or persons are looking at love, they're not defining love as anything about balance or equity or whatever. So love must. So then I'm always perplexed as to how in the community persons have verbal expressions of love and care. Sometimes I go from station to station on
Mm-hmm.
Sundays to
Mm-hmm.
listen to different groups, different ethnic groups to speak about it. And they're all
Mm-hmm.
speaking about wanting to love and wanting to care. But in the very meantime, um, the giving seems to be to bring in only the financial resources, but not to bring equity to the situations that are creating the need for the difference, for the inequity.
Yeah.
You see, and so then love to me is then must be defined differently. So I can't wait for the opportunity to bring people together, because I do believe that people around the world do want harmony. I do believe that people want, somewhere in the back, we want to understand each other. But it must be a fear of loss of something, or the fear of some change.
Yeah. And so, um, my one of my mentors, the presiding bishop of the shrine, he says love. He says this all the time. Love is an action word. Love is not just about that kind of gooey feeling you have about someone or
Mhm.
something. It's it's an action word. It's those things that you're willing to do, even when you may not be liking a particular person, but because you love them, you're willing to do. You're willing to sacrifice. You're willing to invest. You're willing to, you know, go the extra mile. Do whatever. Um, and black people have um, been expected to quote unquote love everyone but ourselves. And what we see is
Mhm.
groups of people that love themselves, they they get involved and love the action word. They begin investing, sacrificing,
Mhm.
building things to make sure that their people are okay. And if they can do
Mhm.
that, then they can work with and deal with others. But
Yeah.
if they don't, if they're not okay as a people where their needs are met,
Mhm.
then they realize that anyone can treat them any kind of way. So
Right.
black
Right.
people, we're always told when we have this conversation about love, it's always focused outward and it's rarely focused inward where we love ourselves
Right.
enough to
Mm-hmm.
say, you know what, we're not gonna allow our children, our seniors to just be treated any kind of way. We're gonna do these things to we're not gonna allow our children to be miseducated. Um, we're not gonna allow, folk want to demonize black history and black studies. um, we're not going to allow that madness to stop us from teaching our children. We're not
Mm-hmm.
going to allow the um, voter suppression activities of the GOP stop us from voting and getting access to
Right.
the resources that we need. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
love ourselves enough to do those things to make sure that our people are protected, and we're also going to love ourselves enough to let people know that if you do anything to disrespect us, there's going to be
Right.
consequences and repercussions. In the Jewish community, they have an organization called the Anti Defamation League. And if they think you are saying anything negative about the Jewish community, you don't even have to be saying anything negative about the Jewish community. They just need to think that you are. And if they think you are, they are coming after you. You are going to feel the weight of that organization on your neck or on your wallet. You're going to feel it some kind
Something.
of way.
Something. That's right.
They're not going to just going, and Derek Muhammad, local activist, he said, people asked him, how long will uh, police brutality and all this brutality hinder us as a people? And I'm paraphrasing him, but he said, it will continue as long as there are no consequences and repercussions for
That's
those
right.
who mistreat us.
And I think this internal thing that you're speaking about, I think it has something to do with how we handle our families. See, I think it comes how in terms of consequences or the need to connect with community or who you are as a family. How do you, and I tell couples, it even impacts coupleship and marriages. How do you protect whether your family's in wrong or not? How do you protect your family
Yeah.
within your family? How do you love your family? So how do you do that? So some people, I'm just giving an example, in the community or dating, so what they do is then they see something wrong with their family and they begin to destroy their family. What it is you destroy the wrong that your family is doing and you help them build the right. So it is what you do. The thought that you have about family is also, I think, how we what Mohammed was saying, how we handle other people infringing on who we are and misrepresenting us. So it's just a thing about him being human kindness. I love that word, that little
Yeah.
commercial. Human, how you handle humanness.
Yeah. And we say all the time, love folk, be respectful, all this. But in the black community, and I'm sure you've heard this just like I've heard it, when a black child comes home crying because somebody picked on them at school or beat them up at school, 9 times out of 10, that that child's parents told them, um, "This is the last time you're going to come home crying. If if someone puts their hand on you, you tell the teacher. If the teacher doesn't do anything, you let them know that they will never do that again, whether that's by hitting them
That's
back
right.
or whatever,
That's
but
right.
they're just not going to treat you any kind of way." And so, but somehow we've got this notion of love confused where we think standing up for ourselves is not showing love. Hell, if you don't love
Yes.
yourself, how are you going to love anybody else?
Right.
You have to love yourself enough to
Right.
protect yourself, protect your family, your children. Um, in the 1960s, uh, there was an organization called the Deacons of Defense out of Louisiana, um,
Mm,
and so they saw that, there's this nonviolent movement fighting for civil rights. The movement was nonviolent, but the people they were confronting were very violent against black people. And so the deacons of defense said, well, we're not just going to sit back and allow that to happen. And so it was a group of brothers and sisters that armed themselves and said, if any harm comes to us, we're going to be there to stop it.
Mhm.
Dr. Martin Luther King often hired the deacons of defense to serve as his security when he
Yes.
went to different places. A lot of
Mhm.
people talk about, King was nonviolent. Okay, yeah, but he also had the deacons of defense there to make sure that if anything jumped off, he had protection. Um,
Mhm.
because they had enough love for themselves, their people, and their community to be willing to defend. There's a
Mhm.
saying, if you really love something, or if you're really trying to build something, you have to have, number one, a commitment to build, but you also have to have a willingness to defend. In my
Yes.
church, the Shrines of the Black Madonna, we have a holy order. Our security force is called the Maccabees, after the biblical Maccabees. And
Mhm.
that's the saying that they use. We have a commitment to build and a willingness to defend. We've got that kind of love for self and for our people.
And I think that sometimes we don't teach boundaries. We don't teach loving boundaries. And this is where passivity, you see.
And can I throw something else in there that I forgot?
Yes. Yes.
So, and this is another reason why history is so important. So you have Jesus and you have his 12 disciples.
Yes.
If you look at the names of the disciples, most of the disciples took their names from the biblical Maccabees that I was just talking about. And
Okay.
some people may be hearing this and they say, well, I didn't read about the Maccabees. Well, because the four books of the Maccabees aren't in every version of the Bible. They're in the Jerusalem Bible and some other versions of the Bible. And you say, well, if it's not in King James, it's not important. It was important to Jesus, and it was important. The Maccabees were heroes. You know, they so you had a high priest, his name was Mattathias, and he had
Mhm.
5 sons. They lived in a country town called Modin, Modein.
And
They were,
people name their children Modine. But go on.
isn't that something? They were just some country farmers. But Mattathias was the high priest of this country town. The Greeks were going from town to town telling the Hebrews, either you turn your back on your God and worship our Greek gods, or we will kill, maim, torture you, but that's it for you. And they're going from town to town doing this. Then they come to Modin, and the king's commissioner said, look, we don't even have to get all violent. Mattathias, you're the big man. If you bend your knee to us, and if you know, slay the pig on the altar, and the pig for the Hebrews was an unclean animal. If you do this, everyone else will fall in line. Mattathias said, um, he said, neither me nor my children will ever turn our back on our God and our people. And long story short, that was the beginning of their fight. Just a bunch of country farmers. They were fighting against the Greek army, which at that time was considered the most powerful army in the land. It began a 25-year war that ended in a stalemate. And because of their heroics, the Maccabees, Mattathias and his 5 sons, became heroes. For hundreds of years, the Hebrews would name their children after Mattathias. Another version of that is Matthew,
Yes.
and Eleazar, Judas, Jonathan was the other. I don't remember the other one. But so many of those names you see in the
Yes.
disciples,
Yes.
because for when Jesus was growing up, he wasn't looking up to Michael Jordan or to the great actors and actresses that we look up to. Jesus and those children were looking up to the Maccabees, these men
Yes.
and women who loved their God and their people enough to stand up against people who were mistreating them. And so when we're talking about this love ethic, we've got to get, I think we have to get away from the fact
Mm-hmm.
that we have been convinced that love means just sitting back and letting
And
people
do nothing.
beat the hell out of
And
you
lay down.
and
Right.
we don't do anything. And
Right.
thinking that if we stand up and, try to protect ourselves, that we're not being godly, when in
Mm-hmm.
actuality, that's just not the
Mm-hmm.
case.
Mm-hmm. You just hitting on so much here. I'm over here writing a note.
I feel like
That
I'm just rambling, man. I
No,
hope
oh,
I'm
no,
making
no, no,
sense.
no, 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 no. The whole thing, what you're talking about, is you're talking about this inner love that we have and how it is exhibited through action and through
Yeah.
what people tend to do. And what I do know is that this whole idea of for youth and families of the Maccabee, I think that that's something that we really need to look at. How would we bring action just to that whole concept, just the whole idea,
And just their story. So,
just
like
their
I said,
story. That's what I'm saying. Yes.
like the books of the Maccabees, like I said, they're not in all versions of the Bible, but you can find them. You can find it in the Jerusalem Bible, which some people call the Catholic Bible, and there are some other versions of the Bible where you can find those stories. Those stories weren't important to the people who put together the King James and other versions of the Bible, but those
Mhm.
stories were critically important to Jesus. And if they were important to Jesus and all the people who grew up in his time, don't you think we might they might be important to us? I
Yes.
mean,
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean,
Mhm.
I, I have a friend of mine. He's a minister. He is the nicest, most cheerful, jovial, loving person one I've ever met. And he's also like a gazillion degree black belt martial artist. He will mess you up, but
Well,
I
you
mean,
ought
if
to
you
you ought to have him on. I would love to have
he
for us to dial him up and see what I would
he
love
li-
to have him on.
he lives in South Carolina, and
Yeah.
I'll definitely do that.
Mhm.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is this guy. I mean, he just absolutely loves on his wife and his children, and I mean, he's one of the just most sincere, loving souls that I know. But he's also
Mhm.
one of those people who is, I mean, one of the most most deadly, for lack of a better term,
Yes.
um, because he takes seriously this idea of being able to protect his family and his
Yes.
people, and he sees
Yes.
that as a derivative of his love.
And there's this whole thing about that when you feel, even Maslow talked about it. When you feel safe, when you feel secure, when you feel loved, and those things, then you're more open to harmony. You're more open to engaging different things. You're less needing to close your arms, protect yourself so tightly, you see, and then you protect yourself in different ways. So it's everything points to us needing to talk about and learn how to protect ourselves, how to love ourselves, and all the many different ways in which it shows itself with our families, with other people in the community. And how can we tell? So that would be a question right there. Mm-hmm.
And it shows itself in so many different ways. Like, I know we've been focusing on Steve Biko, but
Mm-hmm.
um, in on September the 4th, 1957, black students were banned from um, that high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. Daisy
Mm-hmm.
Bates and her husband, they were bigwig pillars of society. I think they
Mm-hmm.
owned a black newspaper and another black business. They took personal responsibility for those children, for organizing the entire community to wrap their arms around those children,
Yes.
knowing that when they went to school they're going to catch hell, but we have your back. Not only that, Daisy Bates and her husband, and I don't remember his name, they
Mm-hmm.
also showed that same kind of love and support to one of Houston's own, Edith Irby Jones,
Oh, yes.
who was the
Mm-hmm.
first black person to graduate from medical school from the University of Arkansas. And so, you know, love isn't just that, like we were saying earlier, that kind of touchy feely thing.
Hmm.
Love is a community that's willing to support you um, when you're facing difficult moments. Edith Irby Jones talked about when she was in school, and I had the honor of, while she was with us on this earthly plane, I had the honor of interviewing her for the Defender, and she was recalling how even while she was in school, she couldn't even eat lunch with her classmates. She had to eat in a separate room, but the black workers at that school would lay it out. They would have, the fine linen.
Give her
They
extras.
would
Yeah,
bring her the best plates and the best food, and they would bring her a cold Coca-Cola, um, which, folk didn't have easy access to back in those days. They
yes,
made sure to look out for that young lady. And that
yes,
story just kind of touches my heart and just shows how love can be expressed in so many different ways.
it is. And I'll share that with you since we know her, since we talked about her. I learned a lot from her.
Yeah.
I worked at her hospital when she had her hospital. She taught
I
me a
did not
lot.
know that.
Yes, I was her first. She did a lot of. I don't know if you took the picture or was it the Forward Times, but I was her first therapist type person to institute mental
Wow.
health in a hospital.
Wow.
Okay, and she had me interviewing and finding out people's needs, and I learned so much. And she said, never leave a person's bedside unless you really understand what they're trying to say and what their needs are. You
Mm,
see, because you can't help them when you walk away to make a decision. You can't help them.
yeah.
You can only do a little bit.
And speaking of this kind of love ethic, um, she traveled the world. She went to Cuba and she was training physicians. She went all kinds of places where the quote unquote
Yes.
U.S. powers that be say you don't need to be there. But that
Mhm.
also is a kind of level of self love where you're not going to
Yes.
allow someone else to tell you who your friends and your enemies are.
Yes.
You're going to
Yes.
go share your gifts with whoever you need to share them with.
Yes. So see, and so that's another form of love, and it's another form of learning who you are, being around certain people, but also sharing what you have learned in the
Yeah,
moment that the person needs to know that, or that
yeah.
you perceive that they need to know, or that they ask to need to know that. You see, and so I'm looking at all of the ways. This is most interesting here, even though we know it, but it's crystallizing here.
Hmm.
Okay, very good. So, what is it that we're not doing as you speak of the Maccabees, as you speak of whatever? What is it that they're telling us now? This is 2022. What is it that we are not hearing, or that we're hearing and we're not listening to it, or we're misinterpreting it? It must be something. And I'm asking you, what do you think? These people have laid out certain things. Maybe we could talk just a few minutes about what is it that we are not getting, or what's happening.
I still don't think we're getting that. And I hate to sound like a broken record. Every time I have a conversation with you, I end up saying the same thing. This whole issue of man, woman, know thyself. I don't think we see just how important that is. Just
Hmm.
how critically important it is for us to, and it's not just about learning our history. That's of course part of it, but it's learning who you are, doing
Hmm.
things to be open to hearing that small still voice of God that is always trying to speak to you, but
Always.
trying to speak to
Hmm.
us, but so
Yes.
often we are closed for whatever
Hmm.
reason. Um,
Hmm.
so this whole thing about knowing ourselves, that we are more than this flesh, um,
Hmm.
we're more than our problems, we're more than the worst thing that we've ever done, we're more than the best thing that we've ever done. Um, but we are spiritual beings, um, who have been gifted
Hmm.
ideas, creativity, and a mission and a purpose. African people um, believe that we were all given a divine assignment that only we could accomplish. And so through our life's journey, we are supposed to discover what that is. And the community is supposed to help us discover
Mm-hmm.
what that is, and then live it. And so this whole whatever will help us to connect, to reconnect to that power source, I think that's the thing that we just continue to miss. We keep looking for other things.
Right.
We continue to miss that.
Mm-hmm. So we're gonna call that the source. We're gonna call that the. We're gonna look at that power source. We're gonna look at the actions for the power source, and to see what it is that's got us stalemated as I'm through. Now you're saying know thyself. Okay, so someone says, well, I know a little bit about me. I know a little bit about myself. But when we look at that, I look at peace of mind. I look at feeling whole. I look at helping other people, the investment in others.
Hmm.
So we all have different ways of looking at how do we know that in helping people define, looking at search for the self. I think somebody, how do you search for yourself now?
So Jesus told his disciples and whoever else was listening, he said, the kingdom of God is not over here or over there or out in Leaf or back in Sunnyside. The kingdom of God is within you.
Right.
Um, and other African mystics, much older than Jesus, have basically said the same thing, that what everyone is looking for who they are, for purpose, for whatever, but what you're looking for is literally already inside of you. That's why um, African people gave the world the spiritual technologies of meditation, movements, prayer,
Hmm.
so that we can get in tune with the God that is inside of us that can answer those questions.
Right.
We have, in my church, we say we're all born with an inner divinity, or another way of saying that is a Messiah potential. And some people say, oh, Messiah potential. Yeah, Messiah potential. Jesus told his disciples, what I can do, you can do, and even greater things shall you do. Why the black church doesn't preach that scripture, I don't know. But that's what Jesus said. And so, and also, there's that Bible story where the dude takes his child to the disciples. They can't heal him. He goes to Jesus. Jesus heals the child and then runs to the disciples to cuss them out. So, how much longer must I be with you? If you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, you could tell this mountain to take itself, jump into the river, and it would do that. You know, you can do this. You
Yes.
have it inside of you
Hmm.
to do great things. And so,
Hmm.
that great journey that people take going all over the world trying to figure out their purpose and who they are and all that, it's really an inward journey that we need to be
Right.
taking.
Right.
It's an inward journey. I don't have a shorter answer for you than that.
Right. I think so. And I think writing the word down, inner journey, I think looking at what is unsettled, I think bringing harmony and peace to what is unsettled
Yeah.
through what you encounter every day, guiding toward a purpose. In other words, if you do this based on what you're just saying, I'm putting it in words for some people who we might work with,
Mm-hmm.
who might want to hear it in a concretized manner. So it might be many different paths, but it is to create a direction, searching for something that's pulling you, that's already there, and opening the door so you can be moved toward that because it's in you. So it's a synergism that's there, and giving honor to it.
Yeah. And when I'm sharing all this, I'm speaking to myself too, because I have those moments where I'm really disciplined in my meditation, or just taking time to go up to the park and walk and just kind of be quiet and
Yes.
talk to the ancestors. But I also have those periods where I'm too busy to do those things,
Yes.
or where I convince myself I'm too busy to do those things. But it's those things that allow us to find that answer, to find that inner
Yes.
divinity, that
Say
Messiah
it. That's
potential
right.
that we're looking for.
That's what we're
Um,
looking for. Hmm.
and folk want to say, just read this book, or just you know do this cleanse. All that's good, but the answer, I believe, God has placed inside each of us.
That's right. That's right. We just listen. Listen here. I call it listen, hear, and do. Right. Hmm.
And God's always speaking to us. And it's like, um we we each have things that, we each what am I trying to say? So there are certain things that, I'm geared towards, that excite me, or that push,
Yes.
that ignite the
Yes.
fire in me, that it may not do the same for someone else. But when you are, on that inward journey, you can figure out what those things are. What are those things that bring me peace? What are those things that tell me I need to be doing something about that? um
Yes.
all of us, we're really talking about trying to strengthen our spiritual antennas, so that we can collect the messages that are, God's
Yes.
always talking to us. God's always
Yes.
speaking to us, trying to push us down that path. But
Hmm.
we have to do a better job of positioning ourselves to listen.
Hmm. Positioning. That's right. Very good. Well, I want to thank you today. And I'm not just saying this. I want to thank you because I know that you have the word for the people. And I have been so blessed to have people like yourself here in the community. Just has to be in awe, and we have to do a better job of getting them to hear, because when you hear and you listen, then you'll be able to discern things inside of yourself to help you move toward action. And sometimes people are just waiting for that, but they don't even know that they're waiting. They
Yeah.
know that it's something. Then they say that they're empty. They're just looking for something. So I know it's our job to make that happen.
Yep. Yep.
And we have another person next week who carries on just what you say, and being able to look at it more from a psychological point of view. And so I just have to say I'm very blessed and thankful. Okay.
Not as blessed as I am to be in your presence, Dr. William A.
Listen.
Lewis.
Okay,
Lord have
thank
mercy.
you. I can't wait to see what you have next month, but we'll know ahead of time, audience. We will have that out to you, and we'll publicize it in more than one platform. So please be looking forward. Go to our website. You'll also see it on Facebook. You'll see it in minute. You get emails. You'll also see it in Instagram and some other things as to what's coming, so you can be ready. Join the class. Sign up for the class, because you can be a participant. You can learn to not only take notes, but you can begin to write about your history. You can begin to write how that can unfold for your family and for your community. So we'll look forward to see you same place, same time, same station next week. And remember this, and renew your beliefs, renew connection with families, renew your faith and build your faith. And remember, it's not the circumstances we meet, it is the manner in which we respond that determines health, happiness, and success. So I'll see you next week, 7 o'clock.